Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi barakatuh, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Decolonizing the Narrative. I am joined by none other than my dear brother Abdullahi. Abdullahi is going into second year to study history and international relations here at King's College London. He is co-founder of House of Wisdom and he is a very dear brother to me. So, do you want to give an introduction about yourself? I tried to give a bit of an introduction, but Abdullahi, do you want to give a bit of an introduction, a background of who you are? For the viewers who are watching, obviously you might not know.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think I'm 21 years old first of all, so I don't really have an introduction to give, but you've basically hit all the points. I'm 21 years old. I'm going into second year of university studying history and international relations. With that being said, Mehdi is studying history and political science. We're basically studying political economy, and Wallahi, I would definitely say he has more initiative when it comes to thinking about history and historical. I really take influence from him, Allahu barik. So yeah, that's basically me. I'm not really an interesting person in that sense.
So you're 21, but you're first year.
First year.
So I'm 19, obviously. For first year, it's normally there, traditionally 18.
Yeah. So
why did you join later?
So it's actually very funny. I took 2 gap years. I'm not going to talk about the first one, but the second one was last year. I went to Egypt, alhamdulillah. I studied a little bit of our tradition, Islam, in Egypt, and I familiarized myself with some of the concepts that we have, the basic concepts on very, very basic level. Alhamdulillah, and I was able to sort of gain a grasp. And then, because I think there's this idea of as soon as you finish university, as soon as you finish sixth form, you have to come into university. You know what I mean? But that's definitely not the case. Some people can choose to take a year off or even abandon the whole idea of university altogether. You know what I mean? Us as Muslims living in this day and age, there's lots of things that we should be looking at, lots of different paths and avenues in order to gain success, not only in our lives, but the lives of people around us. It's not only determined, it's not only gained through one singular path, which is university. You know what I mean? 100%. The path of us going to finish sixth form, getting certain grades, and then moving to university, and then moving into a 9 to 5, and then doing so forth and so on. So, yeah.
So the purpose of Decolonizing the Narrative is to have a platform for people who might not have the platform to speak out on certain issues, and to speak out on certain issues which the mainstream media don't really cover, right? So, of course, today's podcast, if you've seen the title of the video or the title of the podcast that you clicked on, is What is the Ummah? Before we go into that, I think we should talk a bit about what is House of Wisdom. Because I said co-founder of House of Wisdom Society here at KCL. But what is House of Wisdom to you?
So House of Wisdom was started, I think, in November. It was started with me, Mehdi, and a brother called Osama, which is a dear brother to us, who's a dear brother to us. It was basically started off with the premise of we saw what was going on in the world around us regarding Palestine and issues such as liberalism and secularism and so forth, and we really wanted not an answer to it, but we wanted to provide a platform whereby Muslims can discuss these ideas and sort of revive a tradition of critical thinking within Islam. You know what I mean? Because we definitely, I was about to say inshallah, we have to deal with these ideas. No, not inshallah, we have to deal with these ideas. So us as Muslims, we have an obligation to deal with ideas that are a threat to our tradition. You know what I mean? So when we initially started this, we said we're going to provide a platform, an opportunity for these ideas to be discussed, for these ideas to be to sort of generate counter ideas to them. You know what I mean? So we came up with the idea of House of Wisdom, which consists of 4 parts: discussions, speakers, debates, and policy formation. And now there's a 5th part called House of Words, which has to do with poetry and sort of the arty side of it, inshallah. And we really hope that we can provide a platform for Muslims and non-Muslims, all the same, to give answers to stuff that we're really, really trying to hone in on in the 21st century, you know what I mean? And us as young people, 21 years old and 19, that we really have to face in the next 40, 50 years, inshallah.
Inshallah. You gave a very detailed description there, Allah Barak. So we've of course, I don't really like taking credit for founding because it's kind of,
I think, there's this idea of it was me and, it was me, you and Osama, and we all had equal parts to play. And I think we should remove ourselves from saying that we're the ones that started it, you know what I mean? It was the context that we were in. Alhamdulillah, first of all, we're in a university that provides us with the opportunity to listen in on all of the different ideas that are going on and that are being discussed, because definitely university is the hub of, it's sort of a microcosm of what's going on in the real world, you know what I mean, where there's ideas such as secularism and liberalism. They all started off at institutions such as university, you know what I mean, and there was thinkers that they learn these ideas in university and they develop them in in managerial posts such as Professor Shore, that's not a word, in posts such as being professors and so forth, and then it decimated into our society for sure.
100%. So that was a brief introduction to House of Wisdom, a society it was just ratified recently. It's a very, very new society. It was just ratified in May. Inshallah, we have many plans for.
Inshallah, the ratification process was so difficult. Subhanallah, and Alhamdulillah, when we got the news that it did come through, me, Osama, and Mehdi, we were so ecstatic. We were so happy. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So now we go into I think we should start the conversation in terms of what is the Ummah.
Yeah.
So of course we're going to go into a longer discussion, but just on the surface of when I say what is the Ummah, what's the first kind of phrases that pop into your head?
Being Muslim, following the Quran and the Sunnah of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I think if you do this after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you're considered to be part of his Ummah, inshallah. This is the two main things that pop into my head when I think of the Ummah.
It's that Quran and Sunnah and being Muslim.
Being Muslim and being bonded with your brethren in faith, by faith. You know what I mean? That we have faith in common between all of us, no matter where we are in the world, because, again, we're probably going to go into this, but the thing that separates ummatic idea and a nationalistic idea is because of the fact that we can be in different places, but we're still considered to be part of the Ummah. But in sort of a nation state, if you're apart from that nation state, you're not considered to be part of the nation state. You're not considered to be part of the country. You know what I mean? But in the Ummah, even if you're, for example, in India or in Bangladesh, and there's another person from Turkey, and 100, 200 years ago, they will fall under the same Ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know what I mean? Till today. You know
till today, right?
Yeah.
So if we go into the sort of decline of the Ummah, because we can talk about the rise. The rise of the Ummah is out for everyone in the open, right? But let's talk about the rise for a bit, just for some of the listeners. The rise of the Ummah, of course, happened in the time of Rasulullah. But it's very interesting that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu, after all the suffering that he had endured, he didn't. The major expansion of the Ummah, the expansion of the Deen, happened after Rasulullah's death. Can you imagine that all that suffering? And I think that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's. It's a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we're going to bring all these people together. You're going to touch the hearts of so many people who have never even seen you. We don't even have a picture of Rasulullah. Can you imagine? But he touches so many people's hearts, billions of people around the world, just from a small tribe in Arabia. I think this is the sort of rise of Islam. Even when you listen to the most top historians, they said it's unprecedented in human history that a small tribe in Mecca was a wasteland, you know. No one cared for that land. The Romans or the Byzantines and the Sassanids didn't care for Mecca. They didn't care for Arabia as a whole. So not only just Mecca, but Arabia as a whole they didn't care about. And within Mecca there's tribes. And one tribe from that, the Quraysh, one man came.
And I think it's important to point out these tribes were not there was no system of governance within these tribes. It was very backwards, very primitive. I'm pretty sure the numbers back then was maybe one person. I think when the Prophet ﷺ received first revelation, he went to Waraq ibn Nawfal, and he was the only person in the whole of Medina, in the whole of Mecca, that was literate. You know what I mean? One of the few people that were literate and that had any idea or any conception of the previous religions. You know what I mean? Regarding Christianity or Judaism.
And that's the thing, is that not only people weren't literate, but no one actually had education. No one had the knowledge of. It's even when when the hadith came that he said that one day the Muslims will conquer Istanbul or Constantinople. The Muslims knew it, but they didn't know about a place like Rome. They only knew about Constantinople because it was. They didn't know about a place like Rome, which is seen. When you look at history of Rome today, you think of Rome. But they didn't know about that. So even when they said Constantinople, not even all the Sahabas knew what Constantinople was. Can you imagine? And so going into that is that the rise of the Ummah, the rise of the religion of Islam, started from a small area, not even an area, a small tribe within a small area. Because forget Mecca, forget the Quraysh. the whole of the Arabian Peninsula was disregarded by the Romans and Sassanids. They didn't care for it. They didn't want
really
it.
didn't.
There was barely any trading networks even established. There was some trading networks here and there. They didn't really protect them, because normally when there's trading networks in history, they have like large caravans that protect. There wasn't any of this. There was some small wealth, and wealth was always hereditary, and there was tribal leaders, but there wasn't anything that was like long standing and withstanding. But then you get from that to the people who, not only was there, when you think about it, it's subhanAllah, it's an incredible story, right?
Yeah.
Is that within that small tribe, an even smaller minority, the Muslims, who were persecuted for 13 years in Mecca, forced to go to Medina, who were persecuted, boycotted, oppressed. Sumayya radiallahu anha had been killed. There was martyrs of Islam.
Yes.
They weren't allowed to eat food, so they had to eat the leaves of the tree and all these different things. They then come back and take over Mecca. And within 30 years of the Prophet's death, they had taken over like half of the Byzantine Empire. They had destroyed the entire Sassanid Empire. They had taken over places like Egypt and Syria and Palestine and all these different areas.
And by the mid-8th century, it was the land was stretching all the way up to Andalusia in modern-day Spain.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
And by the mid 9th century, it was the biggest empire in the entire world.
You know what I mean?
And it's the biggest empire the world had ever seen up until the point.
Ever seen up until that point.
Like,
and I think first of all, you bring up a good point. The first point that you mentioned when you started was the fact that when the Sahaba and the Prophet ﷺ mentioned to the Sahaba that this religion would prevail over every single other ideology, is the Eastern Roman Empire and the Sassanids, the Sahaba couldn't really fathom that. You know what I mean? They really had no concept of us being able to conquer different lands apart from the Arabian land, apart from the Hijaz, apart from Mecca and Medina. You know what I mean? And now my memory is really letting me down, but I remember there was a time after a certain battle or a ghazwa that the Prophet ﷺ had ghanima. He had war bounty. The war was called rewards. What do you call it?
War bounty.
War bounty. Yeah. He had war bounty, and he came up to a specific Sahaba. I've forgotten his name, and he said, either he gave him the bangles and he said, you're going to wear the bangles of the king of the Sassanids, or he gave them to him right now. No, astaghfirullah. He said, in a couple years, you're going to wear the bangles of the king of the Sassanids. And this Sahaba couldn't believe it. Like, he genuinely couldn't believe it. And a couple years later, when I'm pretty sure it was the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, he conquered it, he called the specific Sahaba and he gave it to them, and they said, Sadaqta ya Rasulullah. You know what I mean? Because it is, first of all, coming from a premise that the Prophet ﷺ, everything that he speaks is true. Even though they believed him, it was still very, very foreign to them, and they couldn't really conceptualize the fact that they were going to move from this small area between Mecca, Medina, moving into stuff such as Ctesiphon and moving all the way up to the Eastern Roman Empire. And it was really, and to be fair, I'm not going to lie to you, even for me, if you could tell me right now, the Muslim Empire, the way it is standing right now, for example, Muslim lands, if you can consider them that, consists of a certain area within the Arabian Peninsula, maybe some areas in South Asia, some areas in Turkey, you know what I mean, in some areas in Turkey and North Africa. If you could say, within 30 years, that empire would expand all the way down to Africa and probably go all the way down to Central Africa, just that, not even expanding into Europe or anything, just into Central Africa, is something for me, an impossibility. Unfathomable. And wallahi, this is much smaller than the Muslims of that time conquering the lands of the Eastern Roman Empire, or the lands of the Sassanids. Why? Because the Sassanids and the
had dominated the world.
They were dominating, bro. They were over everything. They had been in conflict by this point, to be fair, for about 400 years. You know what I mean? But they were the two main superpowers, and for them to come and sort of trailblaze and completely disregard any military capabilities of the Byzantines and the Sassanids and take over them is, even for me, wallahi, is unfathomable up to this point. And any military analyst can say definitively, no matter
Waiting Kings,
exactly. No matter how biased you are towards the tradition of Islam, you're still going to say what they did was completely unimaginable and something that's set a precedent.
Yeah, unprecedented.
That set a crazy precedent, which was unprecedented up until that point. Yeah.
SubhanAllah. And when you were saying that, I remember the story of the Prophet ﷺ time when he had it was his aunt, I think.
Yeah.
And one day he was resting in her home.
Yeah.
And he woke up and he said, "Oh, I just had a vision that of the first naval expedition."
Yeah.
And the aunt said, "Oh, Rasulullah, make dua that I go into that expedition." And he said, "You will be one of the first people on the ships." And then imagine in the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu, maybe 30 years later, in the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu, when he sent Muawiyah for the first naval expedition, that auntie, who was an old woman at that time, went on the boats, and then she died in Cyprus. So if you go to a place in Cyprus, there's a masjid that's literally, it was constructed for the grave of the auntie of the Prophet Muhammad. And subhanAllah, can you imagine, like, how there's certain points, like my dad always says, it's like, how can an illiterate man, if you read the Quran, and the Quran hasn't changed, it's clear that it hasn't changed. If you go, it's historical fact. If you study historiography, it's a historical fact. The Quran hasn't changed from the time of at least Uthman radiallahu anhu to today. Fact. That's a fact, because that's when the Quran was codified it was under the reign of Uthman radiallahu anhu. So imagine an illiterate man who's coming up with all this poetry and the meaning of it and how it relates, and and nothing has been disproven in the Quran yet. Nothing has been disproven. Yeah. There's no contradictions. There's nothing that science has disproved anything in the Quran. 1400 years later, subhanAllah, and it still hasn't been disproven. And it's like, how can an illiterate man do this? Yeah. If it's not from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. 100%. It's not from a greater power.
100%.
You know?
And I think the principle over here is, and I always say this ad nauseum up until this point, is وَقُلْ اعْمَلُوا فَسَيَرَ اللَّهُ عَمَلَكُمْ وَرَسُولُهُ وَالْمُؤْمِنِينَ. So do whatever you're capable of, and Allah will see your actions, and the Prophet and the believers. You know what I mean? This sort of removed us from this equation right now. The Prophet ﷺ was living by this. He was living by this. When he started receiving revelation, he was not thinking about where I'm going to be in 10 years, 20 years. He was thinking about the now, and he was thinking about the small actions that he could do in order for him to spread the message of Islam in that moment. You know what I mean? And this is a principle that now I know we're still over there, we haven't moved over here, but for us as modern day Muslims, this is a principle, subhanAllah, that we could take so much benefit from.
100%.
You know what I mean? And so much benefit from.
And if you just look at the character, not even just the revelation itself, but the character of the man who the revelation was given to. Yeah. And if you listen, we were talking about before the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. There was a beautiful series by Yasir Qadi, and he was talking about how every single struggle that the Prophet ﷺ had to go through had created a man who, when he received the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it was like he was ready for it. Because even though that when they say that he received his revelation, he couldn't breathe, and he was like he was unready. But the situation that he had gone through, the man that had created, he was a truthful man, never lied. Everyone trusted his word. He was an orphan, so he had the struggle of not having his parents. He wasn't a rich man.
He was a shepherd.
Right? And he had an adopted son. He had Zayd ibn Haritha, and his adopted son. So all the struggles that he had gone through. Then when he received his revelation, he had to go even through more struggles. And imagine seeing every single one of your children die
in your lifetime,
except one. His sons, he never had a single son that survived past infantry. So all of these struggles that had created a man that, subhanAllah, if you look at the character of Rasulullah, and even if you look at the character of the Sahaba, it's something where we can't even fathom it. If we can't even fathom it, despite all this education, they want to talk about all this education, all this person educated, it's the point where even the greatest of sheikhs and the greatest of ulama, they can't even fathom it. So it's gotten to a level where you look at just the character of Rasulullah, you look at the character of the Sahaba, you look at the character of even the Tabi'een, you look at the character of these people, it's something that it's very difficult to fathom and to replicate in modern era.
100%. I think this is the verse in the Quran where it talks about the uswatun hasana of the Prophet ﷺ, the perfect example. Because when I think we think of individuals that have trailblazed and that have really set themselves apart from the rest of humanity, not one that I can think of in this particular moment. Maybe my mind is failing me, it does do that sometimes, but not one that I can think of right now had become or reached that point through ease. Not one person had reached the point of them being able to influence generations of people and really influence ideas throughout the ages without going through very, very hard times. You know what I mean? And the best of those examples is the Prophet ﷺ, for sure, 100%. Because if you consider the fact that he didn't know anything regarding monotheism, you know what I mean? He was not born into it.
He was illiterate.
He was illiterate.
How was he going to study it?
And apart from that, he had to deal with a society which was against him at every single turn, up until the point that he was even removed from it, and he was told, you either get out or we'll kill you. He was literally given those two options. And subhanAllah, you can see from that, he emerged and he kept the faith, and he was able to develop himself, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped him through that. And he was able to, subhanAllah, impact generations that don't have any inkling of what he looked like, what he smelled like, the only thing that we have that's come through our tradition is how tall he was. He said he is medium height, his hair, broad shoulders, big bones. He'd have very large bones, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he'd have hair that reached his earlobes. You know what I mean? This is all that we have to describe of him. And the only thing that we have of him that is really concrete is the hadith, you know what I mean? And what he left us regarding the Quran. You know what I mean? So I think when, regarding us, especially as an ummah, as you mentioned, how can we really seek to emulate the even though we can't, you know what I mean? We can't, because unfortunately the Prophet ﷺ, he's on a level of his own. Inshallah, he's on a level of his own, and that's why we say after the adhan, subhanallah, I've forgotten it, but at the end it says maqam mahmuda, which is the promised level. The Prophet ﷺ is going to inhabit a level which is in between Allah's arsh and the seventh heaven, only for him, subhanallah. So how can we seek to sort of emulate the ideas and the characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ? Is for us right now, we're going through struggle 100 with Palestine and with ideas that are being brought up, such as secularism and liberalism, you know what I mean? And we have to really consider this, and even though we're going through pain, maintain the elements that we've been taught by the Prophet ﷺ, such as patience and courage and faith, and then inshallah Nasr and victory will come afterwards 100%.
Inshallah. Yeah. And just to highlight what you were saying about, he was in a society, and you know, a lot of Muslims nowadays are saying, oh, look at the society that we're living in, look, this person's doing this and that person's doing that. Wallahi al-adim, I think it's undeniable that the Prophet ﷺ's society was far worse. He was in a society of paganism. He was in a society where they were worshipping idols freely. There was the biggest prostitution industry in the tribe of the Quraysh. There was all of these different things. That was the main form of wealth. And there was just so much. You want to talk about fitna in today's society. Just think about that society. And so that gives me hope. If the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam changed that whole society, then do you think that this society, which is not as bad, even close to as bad, that if we follow his sunnah, if we follow the Quran, if we follow this, we can't make a change as Muslims? You know what I'm trying to say? As Muslims. So I think just to take a step back as well, we talked a bit about the rise of the Ummah, and then of course the Ummah just expanded and expanded and expanded. I don't like the term the golden age of Islam.
I don't think it existed.
I don't think you should, I don't think anyone should say the golden age of Islam. But it's just for the sake of ease for some people. The golden age of Islam, people say it lasted from the Abbasid period, 750 to 1258. And mainly the reason they say that is because it was a period of academic, flourishment. There was the House of Wisdom, which is actually why we named our society after that. It's because the House of Wisdom.
And by the way, just for the listeners, we tried coming up with a different name.
We tried so long.
For so long. I think we spent
there was so many funny ones as well.
2-3 consistent months of trying to come up with different names.
Random words.
SubhanAllah, the first name that we came up with,
Zenith
Society or something like that. The first name that we came up with was House of Wisdom. And after 2-3 months, we came and circled back, SubhanAllah, all the way back to the House of Wisdom. You know what I mean?
I pushed for House of Wisdom from the beginning.
Yeah, I think we could have. I think we could have considered but we did consider other options. But right now, subhanallah, qadarullah ma sha'a fa'al, House of Wisdom is definitely the best option.
100% is the best, especially when you think about the context that we're 100%. In. So then 1258, it was obviously the Mongol invasion and the destruction of the House of Wisdom and the pillaging of land. And then in 1260, the Mongols tried invading the Mecca and Medina in Ain Jalut and was stopped by Sultan Baybars and the Mamluks. And then from then on, to be honest, you get a period, not stagnation, but the Ummah itself wasn't as united.
Yeah.
Because after the Abbasid period, to be honest, within the Abbasid period, the Abbasid Caliph himself just became a puppet.
A figurehead. Yeah.
Right? Because before, the Caliph was the main figure of Islam. He was the king of the realm, the area, and the religious figure as well. So he was the religious figure and the political figure. But to the point where when it became to the Mamluk period and the Abbasid period, late Abbasid period, after maybe 900 AD, the Caliph's position became solely religious.
Yeah.
He was mainly locked up. He was there doing his religious obligations. He was able to give fatwas. He was able to give this and that, whatever. But other than that, he had no real political power. He had tried to get, there were some times where they would try and get a revolution, but to be honest, it was whoever controlled Baghdad at the time, whether it be the Seljuks or the Buyids or whoever, that would be the person who influenced the Caliph, right? And they would protect the Caliph, and they would protect his interests. Most of the time, they had respect for his religiosity and his religious figure, but most of the time, he wasn't, didn't have the political power.
Yeah.
That changed with Abu Sultan Salim in 1517 with the Ottoman takeover of the Mamluk Empire, when the Mamluk Caliph, who was the Abbasid Caliph technically, handed over the position essentially to the Ottomans. He said, now you're the Caliph, I give you my position essentially. So then from that period, the Ottomans had that role of the Caliphs, so Sultan Salim, and then you had Suleiman the Magnificent, and so on and so forth.
Suleiman the Magnificent is the best name I've ever heard in my life.
Suleiman the Magnificent.
Suleiman the Magnificent.
In Turkish they say Suleiman Kanuni, the lawgiver.
Oh,
Kanuni.
Kanuni means something in Arabic too.
I think it might mean the same thing.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
And so I know I'm talking a lot, Abdullah, I should actually jump in.
Absolutely not. This is your Allahumma barik. Carry on.
Yeah, so then that's when you had the revival to some extent of the political power of the Caliph at that time. And it declined after the Young Turks Revolution 1908, when they overthrew the last strong Caliph, who was Abdullahi Mohamed II. We'll talk about him, of course, in more detail. There's a lot to say about him.
Yeah.
And then again, the Caliph just became a figurehead. A lot of the time, like Mehmed V Rashad and Mehmed VI Wahiduddin and Abdul Majid II. Abdul Majid II was the last Caliph technically, had zero power.
Is Abdul Majid the fifth?
Abdul Majid II. Abdul Majid I of the Ottoman Empire was...
Who was the Khalifa during 1940? Was it Abdul Hamid V?
No, it was Mehmed V.
Mehmed V.
Rashad.
Yeah.
Mehmed V Rashad.
Yeah.
He ruled, and he gets so much blame, but he had no power.
Yeah.
It was the three Pashas. It's the three Pashas.
The viziers, yeah. What was his name? Saeed Pasha.
It was Asad Pasha, Ahmed Jamal Pasha, and I think it was Saeed Pasha. Saeed Pasha.
But there was someone, his vizier that was closest to him, he started with the I.
Izzat Pasha.
Was it Izzat Pasha?
I think it was Izzat Pasha.
I don't think it was Izzat Pasha.
It could be Izzat Pasha.
It could be Izzat Pasha.
It could be.
Yeah. I'm not 100% sure.
I'm not 100% sure either. I was at my peak 2 years ago. I could have told you. The last 2 years I fell off.
Peak is crazy.
But so that's when you had the fall of the sort of political power of the Caliph. But also in that period, so I want you to give some insights as well. From the period of maybe 750 to 1258, when there was a somewhat centralized government, and then after the fall of the Abbasids, do you think that what was the main reason for the kind of decline that we saw of the Ummah in that period?
The decline that we saw, I don't know. There's so much to say about this, and especially the literature that's coming out right now is sort of against this idea of Al-Ghazali being the main influence, that he was against science and that he was the person that caused that said
incoherence of
philosophers, and somewhere inside that he said mathematics and philosophy is the work of the devil. Absolute false. It didn't exist one bit. You know what I mean? But there's also an idea of when the Mongols in the 13th century invaded Baghdad and they burnt down the House of Wisdom and they burnt down the libraries. This sort of led to an age of decline. You know what I mean? And right now, there's people such as I think his name is Talal Ahmed, and these thinkers of our age that are coming to the conclusion of it wasn't sort of a one reason that caused the decline, or if there is a decline, so to say, of the Muslim empire or the Muslim tradition in general, from where we were to where we are right now. I think it is more accurate to say that Muslims sort of stagnated, and that our ability to come up with more and such as, for example, the fall of our inability to adapt and adopt the printing press.
Yeah.
Because
a lot of people say that.
Because our what's it called?
Ottomans didn't adopt it.
The Ottomans didn't adopt it, And further from that, a couple centuries later, a couple decades later, when there was the 1914, the beginning of the First World War, the Ottomans had absolutely no military infrastructure compared to the Central Powers.
And if you look at the reasoning for that, actually, it's very interesting. It's like for example, when they discovered the New World, Columbus discovered the New World. Columbus only went to America because he was looking for, of course, China and India, so he could get the Great Khan, convert him to Christianity, and then take back Constantinople, Istanbul, from the Ottomans. And he saw it as a religious war. There's actually an amazing book. It was about Yavuz Sultan Selim. It was by Alan Mikhail, and he talks about how Columbus's motivation for going to discover the New World, his motivation was actually religious motivation. He saw a religious war between Islam and Christianity, and that's the reason he went. But no one actually says this. They herald him as a hero. He discovered the New World. It's not like he killed thousands of they say Native Americans. He called them Red Indians, right? Not like he did that. But it's because of this that when they went into the New World and they found all this silver and that was funding their empires, the Ottomans at the time, which was the main Islamic power, and the Safavids, and then you had the Mughals who were in India, who came a bit later, maybe the mid-1500s. They didn't really have care for the New World because they were like, we have so much wealth here. The Ottomans controlled, the Egypt and the Mediterranean Sea, the Atlantic. They had access to India just through Egypt easily. So the Portuguese who sailed around Africa to get into India, they also went into America and South and North America, of course, and took all the silver and enslaved their people and killed their people and massacred virtually everyone. And then they went into Africa and they showed the level of brutality, and that's when you get the age of colonialism. And also, I think as well, the Ottomans and the Safavids and the Mughals and those empires at the time, they never saw that level of brutality, because they would conquer. This is what I always say in the videos, and I got some slack from it when I was on TikTok. I said the difference between what the Ottomans did when they conquered, land in Eastern Europe, and what the Europeans did when they colonized land in Africa, is that the Ottomans themselves didn't see themselves as, we are completely superior to the Eastern Europeans. They saw it as, that's land, we want to take over land, and we want to administer the land. We want to take some of their people are going to make up our administration. Because you look at the Ottoman administration, it's called the Devshirme. And the administration was made up of mainly slaves who were taken. But those slaves aren't the same as the slaves taken by the Europeans. Because slaves taken by the Europeans were taken as what? Because they were black, right? Because of race. We are superior. They experimented on black people. They kidnapped black people. They tortured them. They used them on boats, and they used them for picking cotton, and they used them for all these different things. And that's the difference between colonization and colonialism. Colonization and conquering. Colonization, its sole purpose was to ravage a land, exploit it for its wealth, and take away its any power it virtually had, right? Conquering, that the Ottomans did, I'm not saying it was great. I'm not saying it was good. I'm not saying it's good, especially in today's viewership is going to criticize it. I'm not saying it was good. I'm saying that there is a distinction. There is a distinction because the Ottomans administered that land. That land was administered. That land was still, like, if you can look at it in today, like the difference between Eastern Europe and the colonized world, or the difference between Turkey and the colonized world, and Eastern Europe is still colonized, right, by later on. But that difference in the fact that look at the people living in Eastern Europe today. Look at the people living in Africa today. Do you see the difference?
100%. And I think also, you saying that, there's one thing that we also need to pick apart. There was the doctrine of the Papal Bull. The Papal Bull, I'm pretty sure it was the Papal Bull, which was essentially, if you were Christian or you're not Christian, the person that's Christian is automatically superior to you, and he has access and can and will do whatever it takes in order for him to convert you or take over your property, and whatever he can essentially do whatever he wants to you. You know what I mean? And this doctrine is not found at all in the Muslim tradition. Not one bit. You know what I mean? And also you can consider that because that came relatively in the early stages of colonization, and you can see from that the way people that went on to colonize lands, they were emboldened because the fact that we are automatically superior to people. One, because of our skin color. Two, because I have a different religious identity to you. Therefore, I can do whatever I want to you. You know what I mean? And this was not something that was prevalent in Muslim lands, especially even at the beginning of the Ummah. It was something whereby we want to spread our religion
We don't want
But
to take yours away.
We don't want to take your identity away completely.
Look at the Jewish community.
And not only that,
in
but
Egypt, who
100%, and not only that, no person from the beginning of the Muslim conquest and Muslim expansion saw the other people as being inferior to them. No, they only saw it as a way which we are giving them a light that we have within us, and we see that they don't have, and inshallah, if we give it to them, everyone is going to win. You know what I mean? As compared to the beginning of colonization, they saw it as, no, we have light and you have darkness, and because of our light, you guys, we're better than you. You know what I mean? And this led to all of the atrocities that we saw throughout the period of colonization.
And that's the key distinction, is that because the Ottomans didn't, and of course I don't like heralding the Ottomans as any better, but the Ottomans didn't colonize, they conquered. But because they didn't use that level of brutality that we saw, it meant that they weren't as efficient, and that's why they actually went behind in terms of, if you look at land at the time. In the 1500s, in the mid-1500s, when the age of colonialism was just beginning, the Ottomans still had more land than the Europeans. The Ottomans, like, you look at Suleiman the Magnificent, destroyed Hungary.
I'm never going to get over that name, bro.
He had relations with France and helped and aided France. France aided them. So there was relations, and that was in the mid-1500s, at the beginning of the age of colonialism, before that had really, really, truly started. Even in the 1600s, the Mughals, when they established relations with the British, a small nation, you know, the Mughals, the Sultan at the time was Sultan Akbar, or Emperor Akbar. And he was like, why am I going to establish relations with a small menial island? Why? What's the point? And that was the British who eventually took over the whole, look, where are we at now? We're in Britain. And so if you look at that, it was because ultimately, because of the lack of brutality, it meant that the Ottomans and the Safavids and the Mughals weren't efficient in conquest. In comparison to the Europeans, who just colonized the entire of Africa, the African continent, they ravaged the East, and that's where that happened. And you talked earlier about how the Ottomans kind of fell back. Stagnated, right? And stagnated mainly because of the incompetence of rulers. Because I recently read a book called The Ottoman Sultans. It was translated from Turkish into English, and it was talking about every sultan individually. And it was talking about how after really, Ibrahim, not Ibrahim, it was his son Mehmed IV, who was kind of a figurehead. But after him, the rulers themselves.
This is mid 19th century.
No, mid 18th century. Early 18th century. After Mehmed IV died in 1687, I believe, or 1693, and they put some other rulers. If you look at that period, it's very interesting though, because the Ottomans had adopted a policy of fratricide, which means that they kill all the male heirs of the throne, and the one male heir who succeeds takes the throne and kills all his brothers, essentially. Because they adopted that policy, it meant that that person's way to the throne was easy and simple. It's very disgusting. It's the most disgusting thing. Imagine from birth you think, oh my God, I'm going to get killed. It's disgusting.
Crazy.
When that was changed in the rule of Ahmed the First, who ruled for maybe 14 years, when that was changed, because he didn't have any children of his own when he first came to the throne, so he had to leave his brothers alive. He said, okay, listen, put them in prison or keep them confined in this house or in this palace. Don't let them out of the palace. Don't let them be seen out otherwise. And I'll rule. And when I die, they'll come to the throne. So it sounds like a good way, but what it meant is that there's people who are confined. Imagine being confined for 50 years of your life. A lot of them develop mental health issues. So they weren't fit to rule. They weren't as educated. They weren't as in that way. And also it meant that the Janissary corps, who were formerly like the elites of the cavalry, they were going to conspire. They were going to try and put that sultan in the throne if this sultan messed up, and that's when you get the sort of issues of the issues of the Ottoman Empire begins to fall apart. Of course, there was external pressure, the Russians and the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the British and the French and this, that, whatever, blah blah blah. But also internally, there was revolts with the Janissary corps. And then you had the only reforms that began was 1800s, the Tanzimat reforms, called the Tanzimat reforms under Sultan Mahmud. And when those reforms were implemented, they had to kill every single Janissary corpse. So maybe 30,000, upwards of maybe more, maybe hundreds of thousands of Janissaries, who were the elite corps, were massacred in one day. It's called the Auspicious Event, 1826. Auspicious Event, I think it might be in March. They killed every single Janissary corpse in the barracks, and that meant that the Sultan established his firm rule, and he implemented a new army system. What did that mean is that army system's weaker. Do you understand how that kind of works?
Yeah. That makes sense. But, also considering, because I think that's internal, when you consider also external elements such as the Age of Enlightenment and the Renaissance period, things that the Muslim empires and the Ottoman tradition was not able to emulate one bit. You know what I mean? We were not able to emulate
that age level of scholarship.
That level of scholarship and age of thinking completely. Even though I have my reservations completely with the Age of Enlightenment, whereby the separation of religion and secularism. That's where it was established.
Yeah.
But if you consider the fact that these guys were thinking about ideas that went on to transform the world in the way we know it today, we were not able to do that one bit.
Not at all.
You know what I mean? But also, because of the thing is, you have to give the scholars some credit where credit is due. It was not up to them to really grapple with new ideas in the sense of, we are hearing what the people in Europe are doing, therefore it is up to us to counter these ideas, because up until that point nobody thinks like that.
Exactly.
There's no sort of this idea of exchange of information. Europe's the bad people in the situation, you know what I mean, and we have to counter them, you know what I mean. Up until that point, the world was sort of, it was not as global as this is today.
Exactly.
People didn't really have information as what was going on in different parts of the world, so therefore it's not really the duty of the scholars in a sense. The duty of the scholars is to really develop and hone in on their tradition and seek to carry on their tradition, and you really did see that with levels of tafsir, especially in the late Ottoman Empire and the late Ottoman period, subhanAllah. And
it's only in the 1800s or the mid 1700s that they established relations with Europe, like long-standing relations. It was actually Mahmud II in the after the Tanzimat reforms, who started taking loans from Europe, started trying to, change the bureaucracy, started trying to change the nation itself. But also, when you're taking loans from Europe's going to take something back from you. They took Algeria, they took all these lands, and suddenly the Ottomans, they were looking smaller and smaller, but internally they might have become a bit stronger.
Yeah, but the thing is, because you could see towards 1890s, the term sick man, dead man of Europe.
Sick man of Europe, 1850. It was actually
1850s, you're starting to be employed. By the time it was 1914, they won the first initial incursion to, where was it? Gallipoli. You know what I mean? I think that's where what's that guy's name again?
Mustafa
Kemal Ataturk. I want to say something bad about him, but I'm going to hold my tongue. That's where he really made his name, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
So you could see it sort of being the ideas of you guys are failing to adapt to what Europe is doing right now and the armaments that Europe is developing, and they were not able to emulate that. And then when it came to real war time, they won one battle, which was good, and every single other battle led to the conquest of Istanbul a couple of years later, subhanAllah.
And you know what's interesting is, okay, if we go, we were talking a lot about the decline of the bureaucracy and the decline of internally and externally. It was so many external pressures. The fact that they weren't able to keep up with Europe. Because as much as we are critical of Europe itself was able to hold itself in such a high regard, was able to keep advanced, in terms of against the Ottomans. There was one sultan that I think we both have to talk about, and that's Sultan Abdullahi Mohamed II. He ruled from 1876 to 1909, 33 years. In that time, I think Sultan Abdullahi Mohamed II is a very interesting sultan in terms of his ideology, number one, which we'll talk about, but also how he managed to keep the state together, play the Europeans off each other, and even he won a war for the first time in the Ottomans, like 200 years. For like 200 years, they didn't win wars. He was the first sultan to bring back some form of victory for the Ottomans. And when he first came into office, he lost half of the Balkans, a large part of the Balkans, because of the 1878 Russo-Turk War. He lost Egypt because the British were like, we're going to annex Egypt now, this is our land. Egypt technically remained under Ottoman influence. They had the Khedive, and they had some sort of Ottoman influence, even up to the 1900s, but technically it was now British. You had the that sort of loss of land. And then Sultan Abdulhamid II, when you look at how he managed to retain the land, and he managed to pay off 95% of the Ottomans' debt, 95% of the Ottomans' debt that they accumulated in Europe. In 1875, a year before his reign, or 2 years before his reign, the Ottomans had declared bankruptcy. The entire state had declared bankruptcy. He managed to, and a lot of that was his own wealth, because he was a businessman himself. As a sultan, he's of course going to have his own wealth. He revolutionized the state in terms of keeping it together. He had the new military in the from Sirte, which is where the Ottomans began. So people who were descendants of Osman I's like tribe, they would become and be his personal regiment. So he had all of these different things, and he managed to keep the state together until his very own students. It was his students that he sent to Europe to become educated and come back and bring ideas. He said, step down now. We're going to get rid of you. We're going to implement a constitution. The constitution had traitors in it. And then you see the collapse. You see how quickly, after 33 years, when he first came into power, it looked like the Ottomans were on the brink of collapse. He managed to retain it for 33 years. As soon as his rule ends, within 8 years, or 9 years, the state had been finished. Can you imagine? And his ideology, I think we're going to talk about a lot, is pan-Islamism. His ideology of, listen, former caliphs had just been focused on their realm of influence. He said there's Muslims not just here, but there's Muslims in Java in Indonesia. There's the Indian Muslims, because back then there wasn't Pakistan, Bangladesh, it was Indian Muslims. There's Muslims in Russia, there's Muslims in Britain, there's Muslims everywhere. Let's all unite. Let's remember I am the caliph, and he built something called the Hijaz Railway, which connected Bosnia to Mecca and went through Istanbul and brought Muslims from India to go on Hajj. Did those various different things, received funding from the Indian Muslims. That sort of ideology of pan-Islamism, to break away from the nation states that existed kind of back then, is something which we were talking about, how you break away from the nation state. The last time it actually happened was back then. So I'm curious to know what your sort of take on it.
Wallahi, it's a very good and important thing that you brought up, especially for the fact that, you know what really disheartens me, especially considering the beautiful idea that Abdul Hamid II had, was the fact that a couple of years later from this, we see individuals such as the Sharif of Mecca, Hassan ibn Ali, or Hussein ibn Ali, what was it? Hassan ibn Ali?
I think it's
Hassan ibn Ali, I'm pretty sure. He turned against the Ottomans for a small, measly price. You know what I mean? It wasn't that much to buy him off and really say, okay, we're going to give you a separate piece of land and you can become the quote-unquote Khalifa of this land. As long as you fight the people that we're fighting against, you know what I mean? And the Allied powers were able to make that.
And they made promises with
everyone.
They
made promises with everyone, and they were able to really dismantle the Muslims. And you saw, subhanAllah, if you watched Lawrence of Arabia, you could see he was directing people to go over here. What's it called? Yarmouk, the Battle of Yarmouk. He was directing people, and subhanAllah, unimaginable scenes. But
he's credited as a hero.
If he's praised the hero, by the way, subhanAllah. But if you tie that into today's day and age,
what we're going to go into.
You know what I mean? People being bought off for a small price in order to stab and really turn against the Ummah in general, subhanAllah, is something that us as Muslims are facing right now. I mean, it's a period of fitna, but it's something that we have to deal with. You know
I wanted to get your take. So now we've kind of seen, you can see the kind of parallels that you see today from back then. You see the kind of decline of the Ummah back then. You had the nationalism, which kicked in with people thinking, oh, for example, the Sharif in Mecca in Saudi, now it's in modern day Saudi, like, this is my land, I'm an Arab, why is a Turk ruling over me? And that's something that the British did. They were like, on the Arab, like Lawrence, we watched Lawrence of Arabia, not the movie, but what Lawrence, like people like Lawrence said, the guy said, he said it was like, if you're the Arabs, the race that the Prophet Muhammad came from, why are you being ruled by Turks? Why are you being ruled by the Turks, Ottomans? And then the Turks are saying, why are these people, why are they the same equal citizens as us? If we're Turkish and they're Hungarian. Hungarians saying, why are we being ruled by these barbarians? You understand? All the nationalism just crumbled the Ummah. Like, it made it crumble. And this is still plaguing it today. That's one plague. I was curious to know, because we're talking about what is the Ummah, and we talked about all its history and everything, but what do you think today, in today's day and age, is the major issues?
Bro's asking good questions. Bro, I would like to point out, I'm 21 years old, university, so my sort of take on this is going to be very, not menial, but insignificant. Like, who am I to say what's the main cause of pain for the Ummah right now? But from somebody who knows his position, it's not a great one, but I would definitely say it's disunity, 100%. There's a hadith of Prophet ﷺ, which is, the people are going to be so absorbed in this world, أو كما قال, like he said, it's not quote verbatim, but the disbelievers, they're going to call upon harming the Muslims like they're calling each other to eat from a similar plate, coming to take whatever they want from us, subhanAllah. And the thing is, when we really consider it, our numbers right now 100 times more than there was 1,400 years ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100 times, 1.9 billion.
You know what I
times
mean? Subhanallah, I think we're 2 billion.
Yeah.
2 billion on the planet right now. But there's a sort of a weird correlation whereby as our numbers went up, the level of unity and iman in the general ummah declined. You know what I mean? And there's reasons for this though. There's 100% reasons for this. You can blame it on colonization, you know what I mean? And the period of, subhanallah, hardship that our communities in North Africa and Somalia and the Mughals in India and the Brits in the Middle East, we could all blame this on them, you know what I mean? But also some of us have to say our ability to turn back to the scripture and what has been revealed has to be at a very high level, especially right now, you know what I mean?
100%.
When we face stuff such as the invasion of Palestine and the genocide of the Palestinian people, and we have stuff such as people Sudan and Somalia, Bangladesh, you know what I mean? All of these are not caused from a vacuum. They didn't come up out of nowhere. It is 100%, you can tie them back to causes such as colonization, but there's also 100% things such as our inability to really trust in the laws that have been sent down by Allah. You know what I mean? And I'm not coming from an aspect of the only answer to our solutions is 100% 10 out of 10 khilafah. You know what I mean? I'm not coming out of it from that perspective, but I'm saying there are fundamentals in the Islamic tradition that we have to turn back to. And if we don't, unfortunately, if we call ourselves believing monotheists, if we don't believe in what monotheism entails, we're not going to be able to claim that we are going to be able to claim that we're monotheistic, but we're not going to be able to claim that we're following it properly and then live in peace and the way we want to live if we're not following those things that have been revealed. You know what I mean?
On the point that you were saying about disunity, for me, I think there's 5 critical issues that's plaguing the Ummah today. One is disunity, 100%. And this unity is not just a menial term saying disunity between this country and that country or countries. It's between Muslims even within our society. Even within our society. Oh, this person, he's Sunni or Shia. Or this person is Hanafi and this person Shafi and this person. So disunity within that. Or disunity in very menial things. Even amongst people within this society, because we live in a very diverse society of like, he's a Muslim but he's Somali, and this guy's a Muslim but he's Bengali. You know what I'm trying to say? And in the time of Prophet ﷺ, none of this existed. Why? What's the point of it? There's no such thing. They were because there's no one Arab race, right? There's Arabs in Egypt, and there's Arabs in Saudi. There was no, like, the Prophet ﷺ's people weren't the same people as the people in Egypt. But now they all, like, you know what I'm trying to say? So we're all one. That's one crucial issue. But for me, I think colonization, as you highlighted, the remnants still exist. Because when you remove such a force, the prime example is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. When you remove something which has been ruling an area for hundreds of years, and you remove it without providing a backup or structure or anything, you just leave. There's going to be a power vacuum. Same with Algeria, same with Libya, same with all these different areas. Why do you think there's a rise of dictatorial regimes in places like in large places in the Muslim countries? It's not coming out of thin air. It's coming because there is there was one series on Netflix called How to Become a Tyrant, and one of the people were saying is that when nations are very struggling a lot, there's a beauty in one person saying, I alone can fix everything. Just give me the power. And that's what you're seeing. It's a psychological thing as well. So that's definitely like the fact that colonization had left and stolen. Let's not talk about when we talk about the Ummah, we're always thinking about Arab countries, or even if we think about Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia. Most of the time we neglect Indonesia, Malaysia, but also the entire of sub-Saharan Africa, right? Look how much area that's the Muslim areas there. There's Mali and Mauritania, all these areas that are Muslim majority. They're just completely disregarded. Okay, they're Muslim, but you know what I'm trying to say? Those are Muslim majority areas. Why are they struggling? Every single country has a story. So the fact that no one knows about those stories, and so that's the colonization part. Another thing I think is education. And I want to get your take on this. Do you think that the lack of education across the Ummah is what's really negatively impacting?
Oh man, I think I definitely have something to say about this. For me, education is like 100% the foremost thing in our tradition. You know what I mean? Iqra. and everyone's heard, if you've listened to any sort of tafsir, when you hear Iqra, it means knowledge, it means read. From this, we get a sort of principle and foundation.
It was the first
word revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, which is gain knowledge, read. You know what I mean? Learn, gain information. And right now we have real forces that are against ideas of us, against the idea of us as a Muslim population gaining information. And this is why genuinely I think, from my heart, the sort of revival, if you want to put it, or the resurgence of Muslim ideas is going to come from a place, wherever it is, that is learned. Obviously, this is where it comes from. Because, for example, you take the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment led to the what's it called? The dominance of Europe over the rest of the world. Through what? Through education.
Knowledge, yeah.
Through knowledge.
Why
the dissemination of knowledge.
Why was the Muslim world ahead of the rest of the world?
Yeah, and
in
I think
period,
100%.
750 to 1258.
Because of knowledge. And the fact that they were able to really stick to the Quran and Sunnah, and from there develop sciences such as fiqh and usul al-fiqh and
not just fiqh and not just Islam. Is what separate to that. Mathematics, astronomy, science.
This all came
First man to fly was Ibn Khirnas.
100%. This all came from the idea of we have to go out and really do tadabbur and tafakkur and think about the things that had been revealed to us to a much deeper extent. 100%. You know what I mean? And not really look at it from a perspective of we have been provided with certain texts in the West or in the East. You know what I mean? We've been provided with maths, English, science, and we're told once you finish curriculum, for example, in Kenya, where I stayed for a little bit, you go to class 8, you finish class 8, you go to university, you do 4 years of secondary school, you do 4 years of university, and then you go into work. You know what I mean? And there's been, I promise you, so many counter-refutations against the system of education that we have in the 21st century, and I don't think this is the correct place to get into it, but there's not this culture of freedom of ideas, you know what I mean? Freedom of going to different teachers and figuring out what you like and really developing and honing your strengths, you know what I mean? And you can divide this into two. One, your secular sciences and your religious sciences. And in the middle, you find that the mastery of both really brings up somebody from a position of, subhanallah, we are divided as an ummah into somebody or people that do that, or community that does a mix of, for example, engineering and medicine and, I don't know, give me another secular science, and they mix it with, subhanallah, hadith or usul al-fiqh and fiqh and the Quran and the qira'at. This person is going to be, or this community is going to be several light years away from what we're seeing right now. You know what I mean? And you don't find that right now, because you can definitely see it coming with people I really admire. There's individuals that I can name, such as Tom Fikini and Mohammed Hijab to a certain extent, and Hamza Zoutsis. These individuals that have taken the West and their ideas and also have not forgotten the tradition of Islam and orthodoxy of Islam, and really brought them together and honed them together to bring really conclusive answers. Because why? We're going to face problems such as liberalism. And liberalism, to a certain extent, you can answer it with hadith and the Quran. 100%, these are suitable enough.
What does liberalism mean to you? As in
what liberalism means to me. Yeah. So I think there's a difference between philosophical liberalism and liberalism, modern day liberalism, which is really categorized or really defined as things that constitute free speech, freedom of expression, freedom of to do whatever you like without there being any. If there's no harm to anybody else, you're able to do that. You know what I mean? Sort of the harm principle that's involved in that. But philosophical liberalism is obviously different to that. Therefore, these ideas such as liberalism or secularism, when it comes into contact with the Quran and Hadith, it can be destroyed. You know what I mean? 100%. But to provide Muslims with both the secular sciences, such as politics, and Islamic science, such as the Quran, and then disseminate this to other people who are not Muslim, it will give a much stronger argument against these concepts that are faced, such as liberalism, secularism, than just providing the Quran and Sunnah or the Quran and Hadith to these people that are not Muslim. You know what I mean? And in this, we find that the position that we're in as Muslims, in Britain especially, and in the West, we can, inshallah wa ta'ala, and I think I'm going to stop yapping now, we can really affect change and bring about change and sort of affect changes where we are right now by mastering both of these aspects of our lives and both of these sciences, and putting obviously Islam number one and foremost in our pursuit, and with that taking the secular sciences and saying, in order for us to make Islam prevail, we're going to take secular sciences and also use it to our advantage.
I think that's a very good breakdown of everything in terms of the educational aspect. I don't even need to add anything.
Yeah, I think
you broke it down in terms of how important education is. And I think the reason that I'm saying it's plaguing the Ummah is because I've travelled, alhamdulillah, I've been lucky enough to travel to places like Bangladesh, and which is my home nation, and other places around. And you see the difference in the educational system here and the educational system there. For example, just a small point is that university here is 6 months. Technically it's 6 months, right? 6 months in, 6 months out. There, it's 10 months, 1 month break per semester.
Wow.
1 month per semester you get off. That's it. And the rest of the time is 5 days a week minimum. 5 days a week minimum. Every single day you're there from 9 to 5, no questions. And that's university. That's not college, that's not sixth form, that's not secondary, primary, that's university. And it's overworking their students. There's no place there really to study the likes of politics, study the likes of history, social science. It's engineering. There is economics, to be fair, public health economics, stuff like that. And that's it really. And there's not a vast variety of jobs and opportunities. So someone's going to become a politician. What they're going to study? But and that's why you have the weakness in the politics of that country. The corruptness is coming from the lack of education. Yeah. And if people who are educated are places in like, for example, we're in the West, how are we going to transform a society which isn't Muslim majority? We have to do any steps we can.
I think you bring up a very good point. The thing is, there's this maybe a conceptualization that us as Muslims being in the West, we might be superior in thinking or in our capabilities than the people that are in the East, in the Ummah that's in the East. You know what I mean? And I don't agree with this. You haven't said this, but there's this sort of idea that you get, especially interacting with people in the West that are Muslims, that say, because we've gone through the university system, and we've been in the West and we know the ideas of the West, and we have secular sciences and stuff such as politics under our belt, people in the East, they don't know anything about that. They probably just know about what's it called, the secular sciences only, such as engineering or
it's narrow-minded to think.
I think this is very narrow-minded, and a better way to come and approach this is, we have aspects in our thinking that maybe they are yet to receive, and we have to provide it to them.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? We have to provide it to them. Such as what? We have the ability to we have easy access to sources of philosophy, or sources of politics, or sources of international relations that we can disseminate to them and establish and set up centers of learning. And bro, we have so much to learn from the East, from the East. I don't want to talk about the East, but from places such as Arabia and Somalia and India. We have so much to learn. You know what I mean? We probably have more to learn from them than they do for us.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? We have more to learn from them than they have to learn from us. You know what I mean? So I think there's a balance whereby it has to be struck. We have to realize, on the one hand, we have easier access to knowledge and easier access to sort of stations of power. You know what I mean? Because, for example, you take the issue of Palestine. Number one perpetrator after the actual Israelis and the Zionists themselves is America.
USA.
Is America, is the USA. And after the USA is Britain, 100,000%. Maybe arguably Germany. You know what I mean? So the only thing that we can argue from our perspective when we're talking about the people that are not in the West, we can say, oh, we have access to the people in the West and the systems of power that actually cause oppression in the Middle East.
Exactly, yeah.
We can say that 100%. But then what? We have then an obligation to turn against these systems of oppression
and try
and change them from within. And then this is the crucial part, whereby no matter what we think, the position that we're in, even if we think it's a superior one, which I don't agree with, and I know that you don't agree with too, most Muslims don't agree with anyways, but even if we think that we're in a position that we are superior, we have an obligation. We have a huge obligation on our backs. 100%. You know what I mean? Two, right now we've been given the opportunity to stay in the West, to influence the West within its system, within the system itself, even without the system, from without the system too. And if we don't do that from the position that we're in right now, we're going to be asked about in the day of judgment.
Yawm al-Qiyamah,
Yawm al-Qiyamah, 100%.
And that is it's a very true point. Is that we have an obligation to make a change, and this is number 4.4 of the issues I see with Ummah, is that people who have power use it for their own benefit and don't use it to benefit the Ummah as a whole. For example, you see the level of wealth in places like UAE. You see, if that 1/100th, like 1 out of 100 of the wealth that was used to construct something like the Burj Khalifa was used to aid a village in Somalia or a village in Bangladesh, or even a city, it could rebuild a whole city in places like Bangladesh, or there's an area in Romania, there's a village, a large village in Romania, which is Muslim majority, a completely Muslim majority, that is very oppressed and doesn't have the wealth and doesn't have any sort of infrastructure. Use that to benefit them, or use it to benefit the Muslims in Thailand, a place called Hatiai. I went recently. It was 90% Muslim. Now it's only 60% Muslim because of the Thai government trying to send more to suppress the Muslim population. So, if that forward thinking was done by those nations, for example, the UAE or whatever nations have that certain level of wealth. I'm not criticizing the nation itself. I'm criticizing the use of wealth. Because there's stuff like the Islamic Development Bank. And the Islamic Development Bank is going to be thinking very big scale. They're always going to be thinking very big scale, how we can do this, how we can do that. But every change has to start off small. Aid the Muslim population in Romania. We don't need another mosque in London, okay? We don't need another mosque in London. They're going to construct a mosque and then name it the king of this country's mosque, and then, wow, mashallah, what do you want to clap? But if that wealth that was used here was used to build a mosque in Hungary, where there's a Muslim population, where there's no mosque, or Norway, it's people using it for their own benefit. So they can say, I did this and I did that, or they use it to benefit themselves. Like there's a wedding, for example, a royal wedding that's £30 million, or even £1 billion that's used for one wedding. It's like that wealth could have been used to provide for an entire nation.
100%.
But instead it's used for a menial cause like that. Do you understand that?
100%.
That's for me, I see as a huge issue with Ummah. And even, for example, you were saying about the West, right? I don't like this ideology that people say that, because we're in this situation, we should simply use the situation for our own benefit. We use the situation for ourselves. I don't agree with that sort of idea at all. We have to use the knowledge and the tools that have been given to us to benefit the Ummah as a whole. This knowledge or this forward thinking that is provided for us by the West. If we have that forward thinking that's provided to us by the West, why not use that forward thinking to educate another 10 people in Bangladesh, or educate another 10 people in Somalia, or aid people in Palestine? Why not? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
100%. I think coming back to fundamental principles, if you consider the fact that we are monotheists, that we believe in one God, it follows then that we're going to do things and actions that are pleasing, the most pleasing actions in order to please that God, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those actions are not limited to being sincere to yourself and being sincere to the people around you and being sincere to the community around you and the people at large. What I mean? And in this way, if you really have this sincerity, it will become a thing whereby in the Quran it says, وَمَنْ يَشْتَرِي نَفْسَهُ بِتَغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ رَبِّي. I'm pretty sure it is either yashri or yashtari. Subhanallah, I've forgotten. But whoever sells himself, the person that sells himself, that sells his own soul for the pleasure of Allah, it follows from sincerity. And then, because you can't tell me for sure, definitely not, that the person who really looks for the pleasure of Allah in this way, to a certain extent, whereby he's selling his soul, as the Quran describes, for the pleasure of Allah, that he's not going to be willing or not going to be desiring to help people that in a less favorable position that is
look at Rasulullah. Look at the example of Rasulullah.
That is an example of the Rasulullah. And in this way, I see a solution for the place that we're in right now, as us in the West or in the East, because I think this does apply to the East and the people that are not in the West too, to come back to fundamental principles of what? Believing in one God, doing actions that please this one God. And actions include sincerity to yourself, and you fulfill actions that you want to be sincere, such as praying and giving zakat and really developing yourself up. And then in general, subhanAllah, you're going to affect change in the community and the people around you, and there's going to be people that come from that community that are going to want to affect even greater change in the world. In general. This might be a naive view, because I know there's definitely people who think, and I'm also critical of this view to some extent, that you can change yourself and then change the community around you.
It always starts off with one change.
It does 100%. This is sort of a Confucian idea, which is starts off with yourself, and then you develop your family, and then the people, the community around you. It is, but there's also definitely valid criticisms whereby what is the actual the faida and the benefit that you get from developing yourself? How, to what extent, how measurable is it? But you can't tell me you're going to lose anything from developing yourself. You know what I mean? From being sincere to yourself, and then asking other people around you, the people seeing your actions, being drawn into that sincerity and also being sincere themselves. You know what I mean? And you, in being in that sincerity, trying to affect change, such as key aspects of the Quran, that is unity and one ummah, you know what I mean, and this sort of idea that we're one, you know what I mean, ummatan wasata, the middle nation. You're trying to fulfill these ideas, and in that you're going to be probably doing political activism. You know what I mean? You're going to be wanting to affect change within the system or without the system, from without the system. You know what I mean? So I think it comes back to these fundamental principles that what we believe in Allah, we believe in the last day. We want to do things, inshallah, that will gain and give us ease on the last day, and that will give us rahmah of Allah. And inshallah wa ta'ala, we can do this. And in this, we can cause change in the community, Allah, inshallah. And by the way, I said that ayah, I'm pretty sure I said it wrong, so subhanAllah, forgive me.
And the last issue I think that's plaguing the Ummah is the 2 points of illogical points.
Yeah.
So you have the overly sort of, I don't like using the word liberal, but that sort of idea of Islam that it's nothing but just a name. So you see that actually more present in, you see that even in the East, but you see that in the West, you see that in person's Muslim by name, they say they're Muslim, and khalas, that's it. There's no sort of practices, nothing. And then the other extreme, I think in my opinion, is this illogical nature of you're not allowed to do anything because you're Muslim.
Yeah.
For example, Islam is solely about salah, or solely about it's only about only praying and not talking to the opposite gender, and you have to walk like this.
And it's limited to actions only.
It's only limited to that. So there's no other side of Islam. They and if you want to say that you're gonna bring up a hadith that's counteracting what they're saying, oh, but we're not as good as the Prophet, so we can't say that we are. And they're very much narrow-minded. There's one way of thinking. If you don't follow that thinking, you're khalas. And that's an issue that's plaguing a large portion of the Ummah. And my fear is that it's going to start affecting this country. It's going to start affecting the UK. It's going to start affecting, you have this whole perception of, even starting this podcast, you have the whole perception of podcast bros. You just go on podcasts and just criticize sisters and stuff like that. It's like, that sort of illogical, mixed with the illogical of the overly liberal. I don't like using the term liberal, but the overly liberal. And then you have 2 points of extreme, and neither extreme are right.
Yeah.
Neither extreme are right. Of course, it's one extreme is better than the other one. The liberal is better than the liberal side. But both are not following the actual teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because the teaching of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not to say is not to be like, you can't do this, you can't do that. Because Islam itself, only 5% of the Quran, 5% of the Quran, I think maybe some people say 6 or 7, is rules and regulations and laws. The rest of the 90%, so you're saying that those people focus on the 5%. And you know what we were talking about earlier, how the lack of education, it kind of stems from the fact that people are so concentrated on little issues. Like brother Osama was telling me that when the main issue that was discussed in Andalusia, in Granada, before the fall of the Islamic state there, is in salah, if you put your finger at one time or multiple times, it's not about how to protect the ummah, not about how to save the ummah, not how to, because we're about to get invaded by the Spanish. It's not about that. It's about if you do this one time. And those issues, it's literally highlighted today. When there's issues happening in Palestine, there's issues happening in Sudan, there's issues happening in Bangladesh, there's issues happening all across the ummah itself is in pieces. You want to say, oh, do you know, sister, if you wear a backpack with the abaya or fit, like, you spend your time, the people who actually have knowledge, they're spending their time over these menial issues. Of course, you can say that these issues have their place because they're supposed to have their place. Fine, have your place. Yes. But they're not supposed to take an hour of running time and then you spend 5 minutes saying, oh yeah, free Palestine. You know what I'm trying to say?
Of course. And I think it ties back, because we started off by saying education, and I think it definitely ties back to education. I think when you look at both extremes, the people that only say the only thing that matters in Islam is the actions that are done by the hand and by the limbs, and the people that say you can say you're only Muslim by the tongue and not really implement these actions. You know what I mean? The people that say this is only implemented by the limbs, and they're really, really sort of, and I'm not going to say a derogatory Orientalist term, a fundamentalist. I'm not going to say that. I don't think that's the case. They're really attached to this idea, is because in this day and age, subhanAllah, there's been sort of a democratization of knowledge, you know what I mean? Whereby somebody can go up onto YouTube or Google and search whatever he wants, a quick fatwa like that, and he can get it at his fingertips, you know what I mean? Are you supposed to put your hand at your chest level or below your belly button? He can search this up immediately and get the answer to that. And this answer, one answer that he's seen, and he hasn't realized behind this answer there's like 15 different scholars and 1,400 years of scholarship that has been debating, and there's an acceptance that we can accept different positions on this matter. He thinks that, or she thinks that, this is the only answer to it, and they run with this, and then it goes into society to such an extent that when he sees somebody else doing it, he's going to have a problem with that. You know what I mean? So that's how I feel like it penetrates society, and then people really adopt this idea of we are only Islamic in the way we are with our limbs, you know what I mean? And also the other side is the exact same case, you know what I mean? They really lacked the Islamic education of you're supposed to implement actions, not only say I'm Muslim, and you're supposed to stay away from ideas of kufr, essentially, you know what I mean? Ideas that are completely anti-Islamic, you know what I mean? And that comes from a lack of education from either from their side or from their parents' side that have failed to educate them. And subhanAllah, it all ties back into education. So when people realize this, and a community of Muslims realize that when you really invest resources and invest as much as you can into developing human beings and a community of people one by one, by providing the education that they need, it doesn't make sense for you to provide good education to every single one of those kids. Wallah, and somebody has to do this. A community of Muslims have to take it upon themselves to provide this, to provide them with good education, and then think that they're going to come up with either the very liberal Islamic or the very fundamentalist in the approach. You know what I mean? There's going to be a middle ground, but it has to be, it's incumbent upon one of the Muslim communities to take this upon themselves, exactly as when what's it called, the Balfour Declaration was sent off to Lord Rothschild. What the flip, I can't even say that. Lord Rothschild, he's going to leave that out. It was sent to him, and he took it upon himself to really invest the money to establish the state of Israel. You know what I mean? Muslims have to take that on too. It's not going to be a thing whereby one person is going to change the outlook of Muslims and their situation completely based on one person. You know what I mean? It's not going to come like that. It's going to come by a communal effort, a general effort, in order to affect that change.
SubhanAllah, you know what you were saying is that, like my dad was telling me, is that so many people, they miss the point of Islam. The point of you praying, of course, is it's that you're praising your Lord, which has created you. And when you're praying in Jamaat, is that you're standing next to your brother, of the same faith, no matter if they're a beggar on the street or if they're the king of the entire world.
Of course,
it's that you humble yourself in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you stand next to them, foot to foot, shoulder to shoulder. And that's the sort of perception of Islam that we're trying to get across, inshallah. And I think that's actually where we'll wrap up. I know we can talk for hours. We do always talk for hours. Something like that. Did you have any final words or final phrases you want to say, to the audience? And
I think it's definitely one of my favorite surahs in the Quran is Surah Nuh. For the fact there's a passage that says. قلت استغفروا ربكم إنه كان غفارا يرسل السماء عليكم مدرارا ويمددكم بأموال وبنين ويجعل لكم جنات ويجعل لكم أنهارا. There's a central concept I think, subhanAllah, if Muslims adopt, of turning back to Allah in sincere forgiveness, in sincere repentance, in sincere guidance. They're going to get that guidance. And Allah says, if they sought forgiveness, He'd open up the skies and let gold rain upon them and let rain fall upon them. You know what I mean? So I'd say this, and it's a small point in order to gain, for people to at least take home. Turn back to Allah in whatever way you can, and inshallah the cause will be changed from you. It will cause you will cause change from yourself to the people around you. And in this way it will cause a much greater change.
And on that note, actually, that's a perfect note I think to end. Jazakallah everyone for watching Decolonizing the Narrative. This is alhamdulillah episode 2 is done now. Make sure to follow Abdullahi on Instagram. All his Instagram will be at the bottom. Make sure to follow Forgotten History 8 on TikTok. Sultan Mehdi is my Instagram. And make sure to follow House of Wisdom as well. We've got amazing events, inshallah, coming up soon. So it's KCL How on Instagram. And thanks everyone for watching. And thanks for the listeners as well on Spotify. Make sure to follow up. And I shall see you in the next one, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan for watching. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.